Welcome to the CareerJitsu podcast, where we connect the art of Jiu-Jitsu with your career. Our mission is to empower and inspire you with engaging conversations and valuable insights from people just like you who benefit from the shared relationship between your workplace and the art of Jiu-Jitsu, leading you to a more fulfilling and successful life. Welcome to the CareerJitsu podcast. We are so excited today. Today, our listeners are going to get an inspirational episode today because today we have Rolando Torres. Rolando is a BJJ black belt. He is a BJJ school owner, and he also is a field operations person for the a AAA baseball team for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So his love for BJJ and his love for baseball too, we are going to tap into all of that along with understanding the mindset and the benefits of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for mental health. So we are excited for this podcast today. So thank you for joining our show, Rolando.
Hey, thank you guys for having me again.
Our pleasure entirely. Just to let our listeners know, Rolando has a very moving story, a very motivational story, and Jason and I have already dubbed this presentation the Phoenix, subtitled "The Importance of the People Who Surround You." So we want our listeners to get excited, buckle up, put on your helmets, snap them, and get ready for a very exciting up and down journey with a lot of twists and turns. So, Rolando, we're going to step into a time machine right now and go back to the days where you were just a little boy in the Bronx. And let's start from there and build your story so that our listeners can understand you better.
Yeah, awesome. I grew up in the Soundview area of the Bronx. I'm in a really rough time, early 90s. It was a very interesting, traumatic experience, but it kind of built me to be the way I am today. We grew up in a time where my dad was involved in an organized crime ring, a lot of drugs being sold, kind of just things that are not the norm for people every day, and as far back as I can remember, pre-K was these very little snippets of events that happen around the neighborhood. I remember my mom having to take us inside the building because one of the guys would tell her that we'd have to go inside because there was about to be a shootout. Sometimes we'd make it in the building, sometimes we wouldn't, but there was plenty of occasions where my mom would take us. We'd duck behind cars, wherever we can find just to kind of get away from danger. My mom would stick us in there on their car, side of a car. There's like a little building like alleyway, so that's the type of environment I grew up in. The violence was things that you can't even picture in your head, because it was just so graphic, as a little kid. Seeing my dad's friends get clipped off. I've uh I've seen so many graphic things that typical kids that age should not see. Been to a lot of funerals of my dad's associates, and it's just a real rough time. The key thing to the aspect of my life where it kind of takes a big turn on things is just the household that I was in. It was a very violent household. My dad used to beat my mom, and it wasn't just for big things, it was for little things. Dinner wasn't cooked right. My mom looked at somebody the wrong way. My dad was beating my mom, and we were woken up to that a lot. All hours of the night, for no reason. My dad would get up, he'd start choking my mom, he'd wreck the house, and my siblings and I we were just exposed to that, and then on top of that, my dad, his involvement with all these people, he'd have a safe in the house where he'd keep all the drugs and the money and guns and stuff like that. And we had random people at all hours of the night throughout the day just coming in and out the house. So this is the kind of things that I was exposed to as a young age that kind of built me and molded me to be the person I am today.
So you grew up in just a totally violent environment, seeing things that are probably more violent than even the video games that kids play today. And for you, it was real. And then I know that after a certain amount of time, you had a chance to get out of that environment. I don't know if that was when you were 11. Was that when you were 11 and you got to
Yep.
move out to New Jersey,
That was
correct?
yes, that was
Tell us a
correct.
little bit about that move and that how adapting to that was.
Yeah, the move pretty much came because of my dad's lifestyle. It was more so like, oh, he just needed to change. A lot of people were dying. The feds were pretty much heavily involved with the operation that they had going on. I think one guy that I didn't mention before, he was a guy who brought somebody in, and the guy was the one who was an agent undercover or whatever. And all that pretty much started to break down the operation that they had. But it was just time for a change. My dad and my mom picked us up and moved us to New Jersey, and that was where changing and trying to adjust to the new environment that I was in. It was just kind of strange, because you go from having this traumatic upbringing until you're 11 years old, and then all of a sudden, that's when you're exposed to nice neighborhoods. We had a backyard, we had a house, we had a driveway, and even the school system itself, it was just way better from what I know coming from, PS 93, CS 152. Then I'm going to, a middle school, elementary school, and having free lunch was pretty cool, and just not having to worry about whether I was going to get an education or not. So it was kind of strange.
And you were telling us that you felt a little bit like a fish out of water and a little bit lonely in the sense that all these people spoke a different cultural language than you. There was no shared background and you were kind of floating around on your own. You got into a little bit of trouble. You got, I think, suspended a couple of times.
Lunch,
Tell us
yes.
about that. That feeling of like you're in a better place, yet you don't belong and you feel lonely.
It it was strange, because being in the area that I was in, and just the kids, like I said, better education. It was just there was so many resources compared to the schools that I came from. And it was just so strange, just adjusting to that type of lifestyle. These kids grew up with nice houses, and a great education system. And I come from not having good schools, not having good houses, and just being thrown into these just strange water. Like I just got thrown in there. It was pretty much sink or swim. And
Did you find that you were kind of judgmental like these kids, oh my gosh, with their please and thank you and their kiss ups to the teachers and maybe the other way around, they're like, this kid, he's like a thug. He doesn't respect anybody. He's got bad manners. Did you find that you both judged each other at that time?
I don't think so much that I judged them, because I was still 11 years old. I think the hardest part was just trying to understand the move. It was just so sudden. There
Mm.
was it wasn't like we have a year to plan. It's like, hey, we're moving. So it was just like a bit of a culture shock. And it kind of landed me in trouble because of my ways that I brought with me to New Jersey, and then all the therapists that my mom used to take me to go see. And, there weren't just like, I started out with counselors, and then we ended up going to professional therapists, because whenever I would have to share my life with the teachers or with other students, because that's the type of the school that they were, hey, you're new here, feel free to share a little bit about you,
They
it
were
kind of raised,
shocked. They must have been
yeah,
shocked with your I can't imagine you telling a teacher, "Well, yeah, upstairs in my house, we have a safe where the guns are and the drugs,
yeah,
of course, gotta keep those safe." And
yeah.
they must have been absolutely floored when they heard your story.
Yeah, my mom was notified, and that's when all the therapists and everything kicked in, because that was kind of like the starting point of many doors opening in my lifetime. My parents, and just all the struggles I went through.
So you started to kind of assimilate, and then, unfortunately, I know that things didn't once you started to feel like you fit in, you were starting to inculcate all that culture and assimilate, then all of a sudden, what happened?
It all started with my parents, and when my parents started their whole like divorce. And this is when I started to feel like I'm kind of fitting in, and I'm starting to get comfortable.
Mm.
My parents kind of go their separate ways, and that was just a disaster. It was just a bag of worms that didn't need to be open, especially for somebody at the time who was 12 to experience. My dad leaving, him pretty much going back to the lifestyle that he was into, and then coming back. And then when he came back to the household, my mom let him in. He tried to marry my mom, and I say divorce before, but like he wanted to actually marry her, and she said no, and it went right back to being a violent household. So when she got rid of him for the last time, she ended up finding somebody new, and it was just a whole mental game, should I say. I didn't mention before, but it's a big mental game for me, because
Mm.
we don't know what's happening. We don't know how to handle a situation like that. You're 11, 12 years old, and my sisters are several years older than I am. And then my mom not being present because she was with somebody else and she was still pretty fresh to the whole breakup, like everything was new to her. And I'm pretty sure it affected her big time.
Mm.
And then from there, uh, I think you had to go back to the Bronx, correct?
Yep. I went back to the Bronx because we had lost our house. And after, a short period, it wasn't many years, but we ended up losing our home. And I went back to the Bronx and went to my dad's house. We were living in the Burnside area of the Bronx, which is right off the Grand Concourse. For people who know, and for people who don't know, it's about 5 minutes away from Yankee Stadium. And it was a time where my with somebody else, and like I said, he was still dealing with the same people he was dealing with, selling drugs and stuff like that. All I wanted was my dad, and
Mm.
we'd go back to the old neighborhood. We'd visit friends, family. My dad would pick them up, and we'd go to Shea Stadium, watch baseball games because we're Mets fans. And that living in New Jersey and then going back to another part of the Bronx, like a part of me made me want to, go back to where I lived at. I missed it, because that's pretty much all I knew.
That was your home. That was your place of comfort, even though it was violent.
Yeah.
So then just take us ahead now. What was the so I know that you started to get into some trouble. I know that you had some issues with the law. Tell us a little bit about that and how drugs started to infiltrate into your life as a method of quote unquote therapy.
Yeah. Well, I got arrested. Had gotten arrested in school. Had some weed on me. About 3 weeks after that, but yeah, about 3 weeks after that, a few days before my court date, it was like the weekend before my very first court date, I'd gotten arrested again, and I got put on probation and all that. And we're gonna fast forward to when I turned 14 because this was like kind of like the pivotal moment of my life where my sister's ex-boyfriend at the time, which is my niece's dad, he introduced me to coke at 14. And that was kind of like the moment where I felt, but at the same time, I felt like it was the wrong thing and I couldn't control it because, cocaine, if anybody's dabbled with cocaine before, they know like how it makes you feel. It's a very strong drug.
And very addictive. Very
Yeah.
addictive.
Very addictive drug.
So now you're falling into the trap of drugs, kind of helping you deal with all of this violence and everything going on in your life. And then something else happened that was kind of good around the same time, correct?
Yeah, my sister's, ex-boyfriend who she yeah, it is. Well, the one who knocked on my door was my sister's first boyfriend when we moved to New Jersey, and then a couple years after was where she met my niece's father who lived on the same street as us, and he's the one who introduced me to coke. He was 17. Yeah, about 17 at the time. So, here I am, a 15-year-old, and, we get a knock at the door, and it's my sister's ex-boyfriend. I'll say his name, Jay. And, I had just got done doing drugs probably like an hour before that, maybe a little bit more, who knows? And it was coke. And he came in and he just pretty much laid it on me. He's like, hey, man, listen, like, I'm in the area, I'm coming to see you. Like, I've been doing this thing called jujitsu. And he just puts me in an arm bar, he's messing me up for like 15 minutes, and just to give me more detail on it, he was explaining like, back in the 90s, we had those, like, infomercials at, like, 2 AM, so when you wake up, there's, like, the same thing repeating over and over and over, and they're, like, trying to sell you jewelry, trying to sell you, like, this window washer, and then there was the one with the UFC where they'll show the knockouts, and it says, "For 29.99, you can buy this, and then you get another one free," so, like, he was explaining all that to me. I'm like, "Okay," so, I kinda had a general idea, but he was the one who brought me to my first class. Him and, the 3 J's that we had, black, gray, and, red J. So, those are, like, the 3 most important guys in my life when it comes
Wait,
to
what J was he? Which J was he?
he was the red J, because gray J was the
Okay.
instru he was I'm sorry, he was gray J, red J was the other J, and black J is the instructor.
So Gray J knocked on your door
Knocked
and
on
then
my door.
Jay was your instructor. Okay,
Yes, Jay
gotcha.
Millie, Jay Millie, yep, Jay Millie. I'll say their name, Jason Ramos and, Jay Millie, and I don't know the other Jay's last name, but I know him as Jay.
Well,
So now go ahead. Go ahead,
yeah,
Jason.
so yeah, I mean, hearing this story, for our listeners, we're hearing a story here of someone who experienced domestic violence as a child, experienced things that not any children should see, abuse of his mom, getting involved in drugs and having using drugs as an outlet to escape all of that pain, and then discovered jujitsu. And so now, Rolando, for our listeners, can you explain a little bit about your perspective on what jujitsu has done for you? Because for you, I think that BJJ was a catalyst for self transformation. So, can you explain a little bit about how BJJ started to help you discover that there were more positive outlets in life to focus on and how that helped you keeping you away from negative things?
Yeah, it was one of those things where, like, you're stepping into, like, uncharted territories. You have no idea what's gonna go on, and, it was just such a humbling experience, going in there, getting beat up by the smallest dude in the room, and especially, coming from the mindset that I had, I was like this tough guy. All I knew was boxing before that, and, the it was just so humbling, but the most important thing that I learned was that there's people that cared about me where I was training at, and there's just that's the only way to really explain it. You got two different groups of people here. You got people who are gonna feed you all this negative energy, feed you the drugs and all this bad stuff. Then you have the people at the gym who are sitting there encouraging you to come back in and be better. And the fact that I was the youngest guy in the room and they were hesitant about letting me train was, it was my calling. God placed me in the right place at the right time. And they probably would have turned me down, and who knows what would have happened to me. There were just so many things going on at that moment. Just facing adversity, is like the most important part at that very moment. There's still a bunch more that unfolded afterwards, but I think that's pretty much it.
I think that's fascinating that for a while you were literally having one foot in this family that you developed at BJJ who were good people with good mindsets that actually cared about you, and the other foot in your old family, your old friends that not necessarily wanted the worst for you, but they were doing the drugs and they were selling the drugs and they're like, this is how you make a living. And you were kind of like having the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder. That must have been a weird place to be.
Yeah, it was very strange, just because having good and bad, it's kind of crazy thing because I'd hang out with the bad people. Like, I ended up moving back to the Bronx going to high school there, and the people that I had pretty much in my circle were the ones who were kind of influencing all this negative behavior that I was displaying. And I was hurting people, physically hurting people. I was doing all types of bad things. Just things that I can't imagine now. Like, a little 16-year-old kid doing to people. And just the drugs and just all the things we were doing, and then there was a good side of me that felt bad after a while. I'm like, should I be even doing this? Whenever I'd go back to jiu-jitsu, I'd have these people who were just sitting there rooting for me. You don't have that. You got your bad people, you got your good people. So, like, the good angel, the bad angel, it's 100% a real thing.
It definitely is for all of us, but especially for you at that period, that juncture in your life, that crossroads. But obviously, we know the ending here. We know that you chose the higher road, which was not the easier road, but you chose the higher road. And so you started to get really good at jujitsu, and that led you some places. Tell us about the places it led you.
Led me a couple places. Puerto Rico being one of them. The once again the pivotal moment was when it was like 6 days after my 17th birthday. I overdosed on coke, and when all that was said and done, I came to, and I was very sick for a while. Later on that night, I went out, and I chose not to do drugs that night because of how bad I felt. And I left who was then my girlfriend and a good friend of mine, Chris. I left him there. Went back home. I didn't want to be there. That was kind of like that was the icing on the cake because that's when I realized, like, what am I doing with these people? Like they're not doing me any good. Moved to Puerto Rico after that. I met some great people out there, Micah Rosa, Hector Velez, all those guys were amazing, and the jiu-jitsu out there, it was kind of on the up and up, not many people knew about it. And the thing I was real thankful for is that these people were like 85% of them were all from the States, so like these are people that I created a close bond with, and they're the reason why I became an instructor.
Yeah, and that's where the beginnings, the roots of your school came from. You had a student there, correct, that you were very close to?
Yep, Frances Hernandez. She was in the National Guard. She'd pop in here and there, and I teach jujitsu. I was teaching everybody jujitsu, but Frances, who I spent a lot of time with her, and it was just amazing because from the time that I started with her all the way to the end, I took her to a tournament. She won all her matches, got double gold, and we ran with it from there. She taught me patience and just a bunch of other things about me that I didn't know. You know, she taught me how to speak to people when I'm showing instruction, and it was just such a great time. And she was such a great person to me. And she got her brown belt. She trains out of Westside MMA in Little Rock, Arkansas, under Rolando Rolly. They call him Rolly. The guy he was on the UFC. Rolly Delgado. That's who she trains under. So she's there now, and that was kind of like the icing on the cake. That was what really made me interested in wanting to teach.
That's awesome. I think, being involved in a jujitsu school and surrounding yourself with different coaches and different influential people, positive influential people, was a huge part of your ability to get out of that world you were in. I think it's one of the things. I own a school myself, and I get a lot of teenagers that come into my school, and I like to think that I'm making an impact on them. And when I hear this story, I it's as an academy owner, you want to be able to at least be able to change one life in the way that your coaches changed yours. So it's very inspirational for me as a coach to hear your story, because if there's one person I can do a service to turn them into going from rock bottom like you had all the way to where you are as a BJJ black belt, that is amazing. So thank you for that inspiration. Frank, you got something?
Yes, yes. So now you from Puerto Rico, you have Francis as your student. You recognize that this is a passion and a love for you. And so now you come back to the United States and you're going to build your own school and you're also going to build another passion in your life. So tell us a little bit about building your school and then your other passion that you are working in right now.
Yeah. Well, I came back. I ended up having my first daughter at 23, and my wife and I pretty much we just decided we're gonna pick up and go. Because I mean, I had a buddy who had moved out to the Midwest, and he was from New Jersey. I pretty much followed him. Needed a new life, and then I came out to Kentucky. I was there for a week working on the farm, and then I got a job as a correctional officer up in Indy. So went out there, spent the month by myself.
As a correctional officer, did you ever need to use your jujitsu?
No, actually, no. As a police officer, because I didn't disclose, and when we spoke before, you guys know I was in law enforcement. But as a police officer, I've had to use jiu-jitsu 2 times.
And how did it work out for you?
I worked out very well, very well. I didn't have to hit nobody. I didn't have to choke nobody. It was just very straightforward, maintaining control, and getting home to my family.
Nice. Nice little shout out there to our law enforcement
Yeah.
people who do
Yeah,
jujitsu.
we do have a few episodes on of law enforcement guests that, you might want to check out for our listeners if you haven't checked it out yet. So, can you talk now a little bit about your new career? I know you're a BJJ Academy owner, but you also found a job doing something really interesting, being a fields operation person for a baseball team, and you did it. Yeah, you told us that you got into this because of your love for baseball. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I worked as a grounds crew guy. I'm the guy who changes the bases. We make the lines, the foul lines. We rake the warning track. We rake the field, or as we call dragging. We put tarp out when it's raining. I've always been a baseball guy.
I just think we
I
lost
go
him for a
absolutely
second.
nuts when I watch baseball.
Reconnect.
And when it comes to being on the field itself, it is just absolutely therapeutic. It's amazing. It's it's just like mental clarity, like you're having a rough day at home. There's no jujitsu, but I know there's baseball. My entire mood changes. And I tie it in very, very much with jujitsu. And the reason why I tied in with jujitsu is because the camaraderie, like the people you meet, the friends you make, the stories, the experiences that everybody has to share, right? My thing is from a mental health aspect, right? If I'm at home and I'm just sitting there all day and I'm in a bad mood, what's gonna make it better? Sitting there is not gonna make it better, right? If you're depressed, you're sitting at home and you're crying all day. Staying there is not gonna make it better. You gotta get up and you have to find something that you're passionate about. So that's what I did. I found a job working at the field. I go there. I look forward to it, because if I don't look forward to it, I'm not gonna look forward to jujitsu. If I'm having a bad day and I go to jujitsu, I'm gonna have a bad day at jujitsu. Some days I might, some days I might not, but knowing that I can go to the field and I could not have a worry in the world. I could talk to people, find out how they're doing, just get all types of insight on their lives, their experiences and everything. It's just so it's amazing.
Yeah, the self-realization, right, of being able to connect both things that you love, both passions of baseball and of BJJ. So, when you're at the academy, you're like you're loving life because you're rolling, you're doing what you love. And then you get to wake up the next morning and go to work, which is another passion. So it's like a compounding effect that is very fulfilling. That is the key to happiness right there, Rolando, so you found it.
Definitely found it, and for people who are pretty much struggling with any type of anxiety or depression or whatever it is, first of all, you're not alone because that was my entire life, being depressed, anxious, and just having those types of crazy panic episodes because you're feeling lonely, but you're not alone. There's plenty of people out there like you. But the most important thing is finding that outlet, finding something that you can enjoy, not only enjoy, but be happy at, and find somebody else that can relate to you. Because if you can find somebody else that can relate to you, you guys have so much things to talk about. It's gonna feel so great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of wisdom here, Jason. This is deep.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
This is gonna be a hard one for me to wrap up because there's so much in it. But before we do wrap up, Jason, do you have any other questions?
I just wanna say, before you wrap up, Frank, that, this episode really proves to our listeners and to anybody who is listening here how important it is to surround yourself with like-minded people. The culture in jujitsu and the culture that you put yourself in, the environment you put yourself in, whether it's on the mats or in your workplace, is so important to your mental health. And this is inspirational because I think most of our listeners that do jujitsu, they are doing jujitsu because they have found that as well. They have found that great community and great culture in their gym where they can get support from everyone else around them. You're surrounding yourself when you're in jujitsu and you're on the mats, you're surrounding yourself with a lot of different people who come from different backgrounds that have advice, ideas that you can bounce off back and forth, and it's not just about technique, but you can bounce ideas about life with them. And I think it's an awesome example of the fact that you had that in your life so that it kept you away from that negativity and kept you on that right path. And you found it in baseball too, because then when you're doing the field operations job, you mentioned earlier in a text when we were chatting about the thing that you love most about your job as a fields operation person is that you're able to learn so much. You can become like a sponge and learn from other people's lives because they're coming from different lifestyles and you can learn from their lifestyle too. And so you're surrounding yourself also in your workplace, you're surrounding yourself with a great culture, a positive culture as well. So, in both realms of your life, you're surrounding yourself with a great community of people that are there to support you and keep you on the right path.
Well
So,
said,
that's all
Jason.
I have to say.
Well said. Well, I mean, you did like a really good wrap up right there. I will just add to what you said, Jason. Hearing all of this, first of all, I want to reach out to our listeners because you never know who's going through what. That's one thing I learned in life. You never know what somebody's past is and the scars that they have. So a lot of our listeners right now, some of our listeners might be struggling with an addiction. Some of our listeners are struggling with their demons that seem overwhelming. I think this story, Rolando's story is one that is inspirational. And it just kind of popped in as an epiphany when I said like this session should be called the Phoenix, right? I was just thinking, I teach Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's basically says that human beings, like when they're struggling the most, they have to worry about their physical safety. Once they have that, they can worry about first physical, they need water and food. Second, their safety. Then their social, do they have people around them? Then their esteem, and finally self actualizing. You're looking at a guy, at a man here who literally had to claw his way up that pyramid from worrying about the roof over his head, right? With his next meal, that kind of stuff, worrying about safety, literally dodging bullets, finding out where he fit in, building a self esteem, and finally self actualizing in two careers that he absolutely loves, a teacher with his gym in jiu-jitsu and field operations in professional baseball. This, what you have offered us, Rolando, is basically a plan book of how one goes from the bottom of that pyramid to self actualization. And I'm just going to point out, although you gave us uncountable examples, I'm going to point out four that are salient to me. Number one, people who are facing severe adversity and have every reason, not excuse, every reason to fail can always find a way. Number one. Number two, you are a product of the people who surround you. And when we're talking earlier, Rolando, I love that you said, which is one of my quotes too, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. You need to surround yourself with good people who care about you and that you want to be like. Number three, you have shown us that everybody is a product of their own decisions. Your decision to go to that jujitsu class changed your life, absolutely changed your life. And number four, if you want to be self actualized and be happy, find what you love and you're winning in the game of life. And you gave us real example. I just gave the skeleton there. You fleshed that whole thing out. So I want to just say a profound thank you to you. I don't even think you know how many people this interview is going to reach. And I'm also going to ask our listeners, this has nothing to do about jujitsu. Our listeners, in your circle of friends, if you know somebody who is struggling and feeling down, let them watch this interview and let them hear these nuggets of wisdom and let them know there's absolutely hope to Phoenix and to climb that pyramid from physical all the way to self-actualization.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Absolutely.
Amen. We believe.
May I add one thing?
Of course.
Everybody's got their own political and religious views, but me as a person who's been going to church, and this doesn't necessarily tie in with church, but it also ties in with just life in general. We spoke about a tree and the fruit that comes off that tree. If what you give to other people, what you feed to them, that's coming off of your tree. So if it's rotten, you're gonna fall down with that person. Which goes back to show me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are.
Dead on.
Yeah. That's powerful, man. When you give, you get.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's karma. There's a lot of ways to describe it, but we all understand the power of that. And
Yeah.
today you gave a lot, Rolando, and we are grateful for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I wanted to invite Rolando to come and roll with us whenever you are in Massachusetts. We're in Webster, which is close to Worcester. We're about an hour away from Boston. Come on down and see it, or up, left, right. Come and see us. We'll take you to Boston, and then we'll do some rolling and we'll have some fun. So please take us up on
Oh,
that. And
yes.
also, to our listeners, the reason we're getting people like Rolando with so much to share about struggle and overcoming struggle and putting together the pieces of life's messy puzzle is because people are listening to our podcast and they're actually reaching out to us and saying, hey, I have a story to share. So if you're one of those people who has wisdom, please get in touch with us. We'll bring you on the show and we'll just have a ball like we just did today.
Yeah, we have social media. We have a form out there. We have a Google form out there that people can fill out to get on our guest lists. That's the great thing is now, we're going global, right, Frank? I think we're in like
We
35 different countries right now.
We're around
So
the world. I
yeah,
can't
so we're
believe it.
reaching a lot of people. Yeah, we keep
Yes.
sharing that love.
Yeah, it's the good karma. It's good karma. All right. So, Rolando, we wish you all the best with your 3 kids, with your
Thank you.
school, with your
Thank
job,
you.
and we hope that you stay in touch with us.
I most definitely will. I appreciate you guys, and it's been a pleasure.
Pleasure's all
Thank you,
ours.
Rolando. You're an inspiration, brother.
Thank you. Thank
Definitely.
you. Hey, listen, anybody can do it. Anybody can do it.
That you heard that.
Thanks, buddy.
You heard that. Anybody can do it. All right. Peace out. Much love. Take care, everybody.
Well, there you have it. As we wrap up today's episode, let's take a moment to reflect on the powerful connections we've explored between the art of Jiu-Jitsu and your career. In your workplace and in Jiu-Jitsu, you learn to adapt and navigate challenges. So remember that persistence and the courage to embrace the lessons that you learn are the keys to your growth both on the mat and in your career.